The New Tech Times, a video magazine for the electronic age. In this edition, cellular phone systems. Are they a sensible investment for phoning on the run? Also, historic renovation made more authentic through the use of computers. Later, an interview with Adam Osborne, the man who introduced the briefcase-sized computer, and a review of digital disc options for your listening pleasure. All this and more in this edition of the New Tech Times.
The New Tech Times is brought to you through a grant from Wausau Insurance Companies. Times change. Wausau works. And by the collective voice of the consumer electronics industry, CEG, the Consumer Electronics Group, Electronic Industries Association.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Johnson. Even with the rapidly declining prices for consumer electronics, do you have the sense that someone is making a lot of money from these New Tech Times? Well, you're right. But if you and I take a chance when we invest our money in the products, those who are investing their money in the companies are taking even bigger chances. 2 or 3 years ago, a brash and brilliant Britisher, Adam Osborne, took $250,000 of his own money, did what the computer industry said couldn't be done. He designed and marketed the first successful full computer in portable form, the Osborne 1. It was priced at less than $2,000, and the package included software programs worth that much. Within 18 months, he boasted sales of $100 million. 2 years later, he was bankrupt. But innovator Osborne is neither gone nor forgotten. Dave Iverson went to visit him in Berkeley, came back with this exclusive report.
The fact is that I did make a new path for the microcomputer industry. I honestly felt by late '82, early '83 that I and my management team were way over our heads and should bring in other people. In retrospect, I'm going to be able to show that we were, in fact, doing a remarkable job, and that the people who came in after us, far from being better, didn't know what the heck they were doing. The story is not over. There is going to be a lot more to tell. It's a very interesting story. It's a very unfortunate story. But really, if you look at it over the longer term, there's really very few people who've done very well in this country without taking a detour along the way somewhere, and I've had my detour.
And this is where the detour began. Where millions once were made, today empty buildings remain. These days, Adam Osborne spends his time at home, high in the Berkeley, California hills. He doesn't like to talk about what went wrong, only that the Osborne story, as he likes to call it, will continue. Whether it is in performing as non-technical a task as gathering wood with his daughter or completing work on a science fiction novel, Adam Osborne remains supremely confident. In a lengthy interview, we talked about technology, society, and Adam Osborne.
What have you learned from all of this? How will you approach what you do next in a different way because of the rise and fall of Osborne?
You know, strange to say, I've been accused very frequently of being overly self-confident, etc. I think if there's one thing I've learned from this, it is to keep trusting myself. Next time, believe you me, I will trust myself and my team and take it all the way.
You wrote once that you didn't feel that you were really, though you admired the people in this industry, that in some ways you didn't feel like you belonged in the same world with them. What did you mean by that?
I tend to view things personally in a slightly larger frame than my own immediate profits and my own goal of making yet more money. There's a lot of people out there I know, and their goal is to make $1 million, and once they've made 1, that's a stepping stone to make 10, and when they've got 10, they want to make 100, and there's no end to it. It goes on and on and on, and it becomes a consuming disease. Well, I mean, gosh, how much money can we spend in our lives? You know, I mean, it becomes so pointless after a while. What's the point of all of this?
Not surprisingly, Osborne has some ideas about what the point should be for himself, for his high-tech brethren, and for society.
If we're not careful, high-tech can turn out to be the scourge of this country and not its blessing.
How so?
We finally reached the point when we really are able to eliminate far more jobs than we ever create. If we don't look at a general redistribution of wealth and all taking some kind of responsibility for the people who lose their livelihoods and their industries, those people are just going to get mad.
What is your responsibility in all of this? You talked a moment ago about that people need to have some vision of this beyond the making of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So how does Adam Osborne fulfill the responsibility of that?
The only thing I can do is to try and say, hey, consider this issue. What I often do when I'm with groups of people where I think I can get a real response is I'll just drop this question. When you think about high tech, do you get a warm feeling in your chest or a knot of pain in your stomach?
Clearly, Adam Osborne enjoys speaking out, but he's also looking forward to starting a new company again, for the British-born Osborne remains the quintessential American entrepreneur.
You said that all that had really happened was a short detour in the story of Adam Osborne. Is the detour over, and does the story continue?
Oh, the detour is definitely over. Now, that's really the great thing about this country, is that, from my accent, you can obviously tell I wasn't born here. The wonderful thing about it is that there's no reason for anyone to ever give up.
So do you really see yourself in some ways as part of the classic American story?
Oh, definitely I do. Most definitely. It's a combination of the people who pioneered the Wild West, and many of them finished up with arrows in their backs. And eventually, they just don't give up. And I'm not about to either.
Dave Iverson tells us Adam Osborne's thinking about a new way of financing and marketing software. With Osborne's admiration of America's early heroes, if his new scheme is as revolutionary as the Osborne 1 computer, we're in for some excitement. Many of those early American revolutionaries lived in colonial Williamsburg. Now, if you're one of the tens of millions who visited, you know that it's no Disneyland. It's as near to the genuine article as 18th century hand tools can make it, exactly the way Thomas Jefferson would have designed it, if he'd had a K-Pro computer. Here's Gary Probst's report.
There's quite a contrast between a wood chisel and a K-Pro computer. But Williamsburg, Virginia is a city of contrast. It's a blend of the 1980s and the 1600s. People at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation are busy reconstructing some of the historic buildings of this early American city. It's a tourist attraction and a place for learning. The master housewright has been able to use old documents and a new computer to make the reconstruction more authentic.
Well, I'm able to predict how long it's going to take us to do these buildings. That's the main number. Keep track of how much materials we need. That's for the reconstructions that we're doing. And additionally, I'm able to use it to take estimates of buildings that were printed in the 18th century, and I have a program that I've worked out to help tell me more things about the building than you could originally tell from that estimate. In other words, I can take the number of studs and posts and rafter length and compute the size of the building.
Put it in this area? Yeah, put it in over here.
The work at Williamsburg has to be authentic. It's a study of old construction methods. If we can understand the time and effort involved in putting up a building, then we know more about how the settlers lived.
One of the reasons we do all our work with the 18th century methods is to be able to get a handle on how long, how many man-hours, what kind of resources had to be put into this building.
Colonial Williamsburg has been under reconstruction since 1926. That's when John D. Rockefeller contributed to the preservation of our early heritage. Architects tried to be realistic, but there were no photographs in the early 18th century. It was hard to build to scale. Now that a computer is being used, Underhill is finding some previous architectural mistakes.
It's opened a whole new door. It's allowed me to handle a lot more information much more rapidly and accurately. That accuracy in itself teaches you quite a lot, because I will program buildings in and find out that, well, the shingles on this building were 1 1/4 inches wide, which is totally absurd, but all the calculations are running right. And it tells me to look at what they were doing. Perhaps they were covering another part of the building with shingles. Things that would have slipped by much faster, much more easily before, just can't escape, because your calculations will be absurd if there's something wrong.
There have been some very pleasant surprises. Underhill found that whether it be a quill pen or a computer, architects have retained some methods throughout the past 300 years.
When I started estimating these buildings on the electronic spreadsheet, I just came up with the most logical, convenient design I could come up with for this to tell me what I needed to know. And then it occurred to me to start checking the old design, the old estimates that I have, the 18th century estimates that builders would prepare for the purchaser, and start feeding those into my program. Well, lo and behold, they were almost the identical layout, except on paper, done on rag paper with quill rather than pixels and blips. And it's just the same. So I'm able to face these documents right in on top of the program I have done and see how long it would take us to have built that original building.
For the future, Underhill would like to have a computer with the ability to draw buildings and display the graphics in 3D. That way, all of the details can be worked out to make Williamsburg more like it was prior to the Revolutionary War.
If you have story ideas or comments, send them to the New Tech Times, 821 University Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, 53706. Or just call The Source or CompuServe.
Computers may make the wondrous experience of Williamsburg more accurate, and one can't imagine that someone with Jefferson's intellect, curiosity, and inventiveness would have been one of the first to have one. But for many of those living in his time, or ours, the computer is a thing to be feared. That fear is called cyberphobia. It can be a very real problem for us as individuals and for the computer companies that are trying to sell to us. Here to give us a little insight is a researcher, Dr. Sanford Weinberg. Dr. Weinberg, welcome to New Tech Times.
Thank you.
What did we mean by cyberphobia?
Well, we found that there are an awful lot of people out there, maybe as much as 1/3 of the population in the United States, who would just assume avoid any kind of contact with computers. They're afraid to use automatic teller bank machines. They go out of their way to avoid having to use any kind of computer in their work. They don't want a computer in their home, and they're just afraid of any kind of use of any kind of computer system.
What is this about? Where do these fears come from?
There are probably a number of different uses. We found a lot of people in that category have had some kind of bad experience. They used a computer and it didn't work. It didn't do what it was promised to do. It gave them some bad message or in some way was unsatisfying. A lot of other people we found talk about control issues, that they used to feel like they could control their lives, they could control their job, and somehow the computer is taking away that independence and putting a machine they're dependent upon in order to accomplish something. Secretaries who talk about power failures and how before they could keep going and keep typing when there was no power around with a word processor find themselves totally helpless. And I think that feeling of lack of independence is one of the big causes of that kind of a fear.
Is there a rational basis for this fear? They say, for example, even paranoids have real enemies. Are there reasons perhaps why maybe we ought to want to keep computers out of our lives?
In fact, when I first published the research on cyberphobia, I got a phone call from a psychologist in Michigan who told me we're using the wrong word. It's not really a phobia at all because those are unreasoned fears, and this is a very reasonable one. I think that we're in a situation where there are very few places where you're going to be able to avoid using computers in your daily life. In terms of banking at all, any kind of business function, computers more and more are getting people involved. And if you're not involved in that way, you're going to find yourself having difficulty competing. But it's true that there are things we can do better without computers. What computers do is they disseminate complex information. They put it in some kind of organized form. Where information isn't complex, they still go through the complex procedure of organizing it. And so if you've got a very simple kind of decision-making job, a computer can actually slow you down in that sense. So I think that there are ways in which you might want to avoid computers just because it becomes less efficient and not more efficient in whatever you're trying to accomplish.
You do some work with businesses that confront this problem. What are some of the things that you advise them to do? Or for that matter, what would you advise homeowners to do in thinking about computers or adapting to them?
We do mostly problem-solving situations. We had a problem, for example, with a hospital that came to us and said they had computerized their laboratory facilities and order writing for physicians, and we're getting a great deal of resistance from those doctors. We went and interviewed the doctors, and we found the cause of that resistance was the doctor felt like it was important that he had direct contact with that patient when he was writing orders for some kind of medication. And we found that they felt that if they had to, instead of writing those orders, had to enter them in a computer terminal, that somehow they felt the computer was coming between them and the patient. Well, we showed those physicians that if they wrote the orders, they in effect had to be entered in a computer in the laboratory before drugs could be delivered, so that in effect the computer became one less step in between. And that became a much more positive kind of a reaction for the physicians and overcame that resistance. We found some companies that are trying to computerize have found that often the system they buy simply wasn't designed with them in mind. There's only one computer out, for example, a Duns Plus machine, that was designed by marketing people who went and asked what it is you need to have a computer accomplish. Most companies design what that computer is capable of and then try and sell it to companies that might have that kind of use. So we found instead if you can look at what you need a computer for or don't need it for, you can then get the kind of system that's usable and the kind that you can help people understand how to effectively use.
Do you have any particular suggestions for the homeowner?
Again, I think it's important you know what it is you want to have that computer do, that you have some specific use in mind. Most people buying a home computer buy it either as a game or as a teaching device for their children. And if there's some other uses in mind, they ought to be specifically knowing what they want to have that computer accomplish before they go ahead and invest that money. And then looking at that computer, there's some things you want to look for. You want to make sure that that computer was designed with people in mind, that it's comfortable to use. For example, we found a lot of computers have attached the keyboard and the screen on the same particular piece of equipment. The problem with that is as your eyes start fading, you have to either move your head way back and stretch your arms out, or you find yourself uncomfortably squinting at the screen to keep your back in a comfortable position.
Dr. Weinberg, there's obviously so much more to this. Would you be willing to come back maybe next week
Sure,
and we can talk
that'd be
about
great.
some more? Oh, that'd be terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Seemingly every new technology has brought its measure of fear. Some of us are still a little reluctant to use the telephone. Some are annoyed by its constant ring and want to get away from it. But telephone equipment is one of the hottest selling items in consumer electronics today. So there have to be a lot of people somewhere using all those answering machines, beepers, automatic dialers, cordless telephones. And what's next? Something called cellular radio. Here's our report.
You're driving during rush hour in the downtown of a major city. You were scheduled to meet with somebody 5 minutes ago. Should you stop and look for a phone, or should you continue driving, hoping the person understands why you didn't call? It's a situation people face every day. About the only solution is a mobile phone.
Yes, good morning. How are you today? Just fine. I'm just calling to say I'm on my way in and I should be there in a few minutes for the meeting.
Katie Harris works for Ameritech, a company offering a new type of phone service in Chicago. It's called a cellular phone system, and it makes it very easy to contact the office.
If you need to make the stop that we were talking about yesterday, you can do that now, and then we'll expect you in just a couple minutes.
Okay, that's very good.
Okay.
So I'll do that.
Okay.
Now, phones have been in cars for years, but they were never convenient. The old technology provided for one antenna in every city, with a dozen channels for the use of thousands of motorists. Sometimes people would wait half an hour to get on the system. Cellular service is different. Each call goes on a private line. It's now possible because of the computer. The name cellular is from the splitting of a city into cells. Each cell has its own antenna. As you drive between cells, the computer switches between antennas. That keeps the signal strong, and it frees up the antenna you just bypassed for somebody else to use. Thousands of people can drive between cells using their telephones the same as they would in their home or office.
Let me tell you how I use it. I find myself needing to go to meetings downtown Chicago, and when I get ready to go, I'll pick up a stack of messages here, the people that I need to talk to. So on the way downtown, I'm doing business with people that have called me or people that I want to call. People that are using it to commute back and forth, I think some neat examples that we've encountered are people who deal with businesses on the East Coast and the West Coast. And they like to do business with them early in the morning. So on the way to work, 6:30 to 8 here in Chicago, they can call and the people are in the office, they can get the data, do what they need to. And it's the opposite situation going home at night when they're able to talk to the people on the West Coast.
If a large number of people start to use cellular phones, there will always be a way to provide a private line. Cells can be subdivided. Antennas could be placed on every city block. The people at Ameritech anticipate 5,000 customers in Chicago by next October and 100,000 clients within 5 years. Similar service will be offered by other companies in 30 major cities before 1985. But there's one thing that could limit the popularity of cellular phones: the price. Phones sell for between $1,500 and $3,000, with line charges of $50 to $100 a month. But Barnett says the initial cost of going cellular will come down.
The equipment manufacturers would indicate that as their volumes go up, they will be able to come down the experience curve. They would predict that in the future, how far that might be, 3 to 5 years potentially, the sets might be in the $1,000 to $1,200 range, and potentially could go lower.
In the meantime, the phones will be more than a high-priced toy. General Motors plans to make them an option on some of the new Buicks for this fall.
Technology moves fast. The mobile phones we find in cars today will fit in your shirt pocket tomorrow. And today's $2,000 mobile phones are already available to amateur radio operators as a part of a 2-meter radio that costs scarcely 1/10 that. But as we often observe on the New Tech Times, the fact something's available doesn't necessarily mean you should buy it, even if you can't afford it. Take your stereo, for example. Now, if your 15-year-old record player sounds just fine, you can save yourself a lot of money and trouble. But the innovations do keep on coming. And we recently found New Tech Times regular Danny Goodman sitting on the floor of his West Coast home, playing with a new kind of audio you may want to know about.
There's a revolution underway in consumer audio, and it could affect the way we listen to music in years to come. Unlike the old record album that we're familiar with, the new compact digital disc doesn't use a needle, a stylus, or even a phono cartridge. Instead, a little laser reads microscopic pits on the underside of this little disc. And this disc is really something to behold. They're recorded on one side only, and they can record more than an hour of music. I'm holding the entire Beethoven Ninth Symphony right in my hand. To play one of these compact discs, you need a compact disc player, which hooks up to your stereo very much like a turntable. These two models here represent the simple and the complex end of digital disc players available. This one from Magnavox is the simpler of the two, and yet with its very few controls here, you can program it to repeat any segment on the disc you want as often as you want, and really quite complete programming flexibility. This one from Yamaha is on the more complex end. It has a fancier slide-out tray for the disc, and also some more sophisticated programming capabilities. In fact, you can even have it repeat individual grooves, if you want, of the digital disc. Now, I've used both machines for quite a while, and frankly, the simpler controls and the simpler options are really all about eye need. There are still some technical hurdles that need to be overcome at the recording studio. But of the 500 or so titles that are currently available in the U.S., most of them are something you really should hear. Now, the players cost anywhere from $500 to a little over $1,000. And at the low end, they're really quite a high-tech bargain. But eventually, prices will come down. And when the players are at about the cost of a better turntable and the discs in the $10 range, I think in a few years you'll see the digital audio disc replace the 33 RPM album, just like it replaced the 78, and before that, the Edison cylinder.
You'll be hearing a lot about digital audio in the months to come, and that's why it's on the New Tech Times, your weekly peek into the wonderland of electronics. The men and women who make it happen, like Adam Osborne. The strange places we find uses for computers, like Colonial Williamsburg. The new products, like cellular radio and digital audio, and some tips on coping with it all from Dr. Weinberg. And next week?
In the next edition of the New Tech Times, we'll do some detecting with Florida cops who are using lasers to lift prints and solve crimes. Also, we'll review software designed for girls. Is a departure from rough and rumble the key to attracting girls to computing? This and more in the next edition of the New Tech Times.
So join me then, won't you? For the New Tech Times staff, I'm Nicholas Johnson.
The New Tech Times has been brought to you through a grant from Wausau Insurance Companies. Times change, Wausau works. And by the collective voice of the consumer electronics industry, the CEG, the Consumer Electronics Group, Electronic Industry.